When I first got into 3D printing, I got two 3D printers. The venerated Ender 3 and the Sovol SV01. And a lot of people were annoyed with that decision. A lot of people feel like the Ender 3 is just the go-to for your very first 3D printer. But I concluded that the Sovol SV01 was the better choice. And almost a year later, I stand by that decision. The Ender 3 is not bad. I just think you get better value with the SV01. That's not what we're here to talk about. If you want to hear more about the SV01, stick around to the end of the video. I'll put a link to the review of the SV01 in the end cards at the end of the video. Because today, we are looking at the Sovol SV03. And the big, emphasis on big, difference between the SV03 and the SV01 is build volume. This is the build plate from the Sovol SV01. Look how much freaking bigger the build plate is on the SV03. The first thing we got to do is assemble the printer. If you've ever assembled a 3D printer before, you're going to kind of see this coming. The steps are not that different from any other printer you might have put together. It does come with a manual with build instructions in it, which we'll be following. Go into your box of goodies and get these M5 by 50 millimeter screws. You're going to need them. And you're going to take the gantry, and we're going to install the gantry with the stepper motors facing the rear. This is the Y-axis stepper motor. That's the back of the printer. These stepper motors are going to turn around and face the rear, and they're going to engage with these cutouts in the aluminum extrusion. Then we're going to install these 4 M5 by 50 millimeter screws all the way in. The kit does come with hex wrenches that you can use to install these, but I'm going to use this electric driver. In order to avoid over-tightening, though, I am going to finish them off with the driver. You can torque the frame if you over-tighten them. The next thing the instructions say to do is to install the filament run-out sensor. The intent of this sensor is that if you run out of filament in the middle of a job, then the printer will stop and will not just keep trying to run the job without any filament in it. These things often cause more trouble than they solve, and sometimes it's hard to feed the filament through, and I've disabled it on my SV01 and don't use it. Many people feel the same way, so I'm probably not even going to use it. Next, we'll install the spool holder. The next thing to do is install the screen, and it is going to be held on with this bracket, which comes separately. Not separately like separately in a different bag, not separately like you have to buy it. There's some little screws in here as well, and washers. Don't lose them. We're going to take the bracket and assemble it to the screen, and then use these small screws and washers to assemble it. Then we're going to install the bracket here at the front of the machine, and we're going to need to get all 4 of these little screws to go in at the same time. At this point, the printer is more or less assembled, and the only thing we have left to do is plug in all the wires. I'm going to just push the build plate forward to get it out of the way so I can plug in these stepper motors. There are 2 ribbon cables going to the display, and I'm going to have to lift up the machine to get at them. The cables are labeled XP1 and XP2, and there are corresponding plugs here on the underside of the display. On the back side of the printer, near where the plug plugs into the power supply, there is a red switch that chooses the input voltage. It's very important that you get this correct. It ships, at least mine shipped, set to 230 volts. I'm in the US, so we use 110 volts. If you try to use it like this, it'll just take forever to heat up and just not work really well. But if you set it to 110 and run it off at 230, it'll fry. Lastly, I'm going to put this build plate on, and it comes with these binder clips. On my smaller SV01, it broke. I've stopped using the binder clips and actually just use painter's tape. And the reason that I do that is that the binder clips take up more room on the bed. Not that I'm printing very close to the bed on the SV01 anyway, but when you do the BL Touch auto level sensing, it needs to touch points very close to the edge and the binder clips get in the way. So I think I'm just going to get some very thin strips of painter's tape and tape this down to hold it in place. Oh yeah, there's one more piece of assembly to do. One of the wheels came off the bed in the box. There were some loose parts in the box, so we'll reinstall that. You can immediately see how much bigger the SV03 is than the SV01 here on the left and the Creality Ender 3 on the right. In fact, it's so freaking big, I have had to install it facing sideways. It will fit on the table facing frontways, but when the build plate moves all the way to the back, it hits against the back of the wall. The first thing we need to do is level the bed and set the Z offset of the printer. That is the difference in height between the actual nozzle and the BL Touch sensor. And if you think you know how to do this because you've set it up on other printers, keep watching. There are some nuances, shall we say, about the Sovol firmware that I'm going to have to tell you how I worked around them. In order to get the build plate basically level, what we're going to do is we're going to tighten down the springs at all four corners of the build plate. We're going to tighten them all the way down until they don't turn anymore, and then I'm going to back it off maybe 1 or 2 full turns. And the reason we do that is that the build plate may need to move up or down in order to get it perfectly level, so we need a little bit of room to adjust. The reason we tighten the springs all the way down is because the tighter the springs are, the less the build plate will have small micro movements during printing, and just the better results we'll get. The ideal would be to have a perfectly hard-mounted build plate, and some people do that, but if the build plate is hard-mounted and the nozzle crashes into it or something, then it will have no give and things break. So this is the sort of trade-off that most people make. Next, we're going to go into the menu, and we're going to hit Motion, Auto Home. And when that is done, we'll go into the menu and we'll hit Bed Leveling, Level Corners. And this will cause the nozzle to move to the corners of the bed. We're just going to take a standard piece of paper and we're going to use the spring to adjust the height of the bed so that the nozzle just barely can be felt to drag. Just move it back and forth until you just start to feel the nozzle drag, and that is where you want it. A couple things to keep in mind. One is run through the corners more than once, because as you change the other corners, the height of the first corner will change too. So you may need to go through this 3 or 4 times before it won't be exactly the same every time, but it should be fairly repeatable as you go through the corners. They shouldn't have changed too much, and you'll be making just smaller and smaller changes each time. The other thing is that as you are turning the knob, be sure not to push down on the knob. Push the knob from the side, because you can actually change the height of the bed by pushing up or down on the knob. It's just spring-loaded. Next, we're going to need to set the Z offset so that the printer knows the difference in height between the nozzle and the BL Touch sensor. And this is where that quirk with the Sovol firmware comes in that I told you about earlier. Here's how you would normally set the Z offset. You would go, first you would auto home, which I've already done. I've auto homed. And then you would go Motion, Move Axis, Move the Z axis. And right now the menu is showing us that, here you can say move 1 millimeter. Right now the menu is showing us that the Z axis is at a height of 0 millimeters. And what we would do is we would put this piece of paper underneath the nozzle, and we would move the nozzle downward with the knob until the nozzle just touched the paper, and we would know by looking at the menu what the height of the nozzle was when it touched the paper. So the BL touch tells the printer where 0 position is, and then we move the nozzle down until we touch the paper and we know the relative height. But the problem is, as you can see, the print head will move up all I want, but it will not go down below 0. Now normally in the firmware that is on these printers, there is an option to turn off what's called soft end stops and let the print head go below 0. It doesn't want to let it go below 0 because it doesn't want to take a chance of crashing the nozzle against the bed. But there's normally an option to turn off soft end stops and perform this test, but Sovol have not included that option in their printer firmware. Now that really confused me because the instructions about how to set the Z offset, I learned that from the instruction manual for the Sovol SV01. So it's really weird that that same procedure doesn't work for the SV03. And I asked Sovol about this, and they said that they think it's better or simpler or something to just like approximate the value, like just guesstimate about minus 0. whatever 9 millimeters, and then start a print. And while the print is running, then further adjust the Z offset to get it down next to the bed. And I do agree that adjusting the Z offset during a print is the right way to get the last nth of a percent perfect. But I don't think it's a great way. We're so far off the bed here. Like, it just doesn't feel right to me. So I think that I've got a workaround for how we can bypass the fact that they didn't put this function in the menu. I think we can directly access the function using another method. So Sovol baked a limitation into their firmware, and the app that I intend to use to get around that limitation is called Pronterface. If you've worked with 3D printers for a while, you've probably used Pronterface before. If not, today is your lucky day. This app is, look, let's be honest, it does not look very elegant, but it is super, super useful. Now there's a link to download Pronterface in the video description, and the other thing is when I first plugged USB into my printer, I could not connect to it, and when I looked in the Windows Device Manager, my device driver had an error. I had to go to the FTDI website and download the latest FTDI drivers before I could connect to my printer. Just in case you end up in that same situation, I wanted to mention it, and I'll put a link to this website down in the video description where you can download the drivers and install them. Once everything is working right, you should be able to hit the connect button and Pronterface should connect to your printer, and you should see a bunch of this nonsense. The next thing I need to do is look up the appropriate commands for my printer, and I'm going to do that by looking up the G-code. G-code is the programming language that the printer talks, and I want to find the command to auto home. That's the first thing I'm going to do. G28 is the command to auto home. So if I go here and I just type G28 and then hit send, the printer will auto home. Now that we've auto homed, the next thing I want to try to do is lower the print head. And let's see, I should have plenty of room to lower it by 10 millimeters. Here we go. Oops, I've done it now. Oh yeah, it's come down. Now you can see if I try to continue to lower the print head, it will not go any lower. And the reason for that is the soft end stop that I told you about before. So the next thing I'm going to try to do is turn off the soft end stops. So what we're going to do is we're going to find the G-code command to disable the software end stops, and it is M211, and the syntax is M211 S0. So we're going to type M211 S0, send. All right, soft end stops are off. So with a piece of paper underneath the nozzle, I am now going to go down, let's say I go down 1 millimeter. Still not dragging. Oh, now it's dragging. So now I'm going to go up 0.1 millimeters. Okay, there we go. So that was, let's see, if I go, so that's a firm drag right there. And that's a very light drag. I think that's where I'm going to leave it. Now, I don't know about you, but I wasn't keeping track of how many millimeters up or down I moved the head. So the next thing I'm going to do is an M114 get current position. And the current position for Z is minus 1.20. We're going to remember that minus 1.20 is our Z offset. Now I could do everything else I need to do with this printer using Pronterface by manually typing in G-code commands. And in fact, that's how some real pros prefer to interact with their printer. But in order to keep things simple, I'm going to go back to using the menu for the Sovol. And what I'm going to do is go into the bed leveling menu and go to this Z offset parameter and set the Z offset to -1.20. After I've set the Z offset, it's very important that you also go down to Store Settings in the menu and click. Otherwise, when you power cycle, the things you've changed may not be saved. Now would be a great time to show you how to add the SV03 to Cura, which is the slicer program that I use and the slicer program that Sovol suggests. And the way you're going to do that is to click on your printer list here and click Manage Printers. Don't let the fact that I've already added it distract you. We're just gonna add it again. You'll say Manage Printers. You'll hit Add. You will add a non-networked printer. And the Sovol, I wish you could search this. It would be so good. The Sovol SV01 is in here. In fact, by the time you see this video, the Sovol SV03 may be in here, but it hasn't been added yet because of the time that I'm making this video. It's too new. So you're going to add the Sovol SV01, but you'll just change the name to Sovol SV03. And in fact, I'm going to just make it like this so I know that this is the one I'm adding for this video. Then hit Machine Settings and make the following changes. Change the X width to 350, the Y depth to 350, and the Z height to 400. And then here in the Start G-code, find the line that reads G28 Home and add another line immediately after that, G29. At this point, I would love to say to you, and now you are ready to print and you're going to get great results. And you might. You've got the basics dialed in. But there are more steps you can go through to tune your printer to get the absolute best results. And I want to refer you to this webpage from Teaching Tech, which is just one of the best 3D printing resources out there. Teaching Tech has a full set of in-depth calibration steps that are way beyond anything I would get into on my channel that may help you get even better results. But if you're dying to print right now, print the bed level test print, which is on the SD card that came with your SV03. When you run that print, you can take a look at how your first layer is going down. And if you know what to look for, you can see whether your bed is a little bit high or a little bit low. And you can continue to tweak the Z offset just a little bit to get the best possible results. And at that point, I think you'll be able to get at least decent prints. If you want to get fantastic prints, you can go through this Teaching Tech printer calibration. That's going to do it for this video, though. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you've got the SV03 or if you've got any other 3D printer, I hope you're enjoying the heck out of it. I'll put a link to a couple more videos down in the video description of other topics like how to use a slicer or other topics that I've made if you want to check those out. Thank you so much for watching. Happy flying. Do you see this baby? Isn't he cute? Hit the subscribe button. Join my Patreon. Use my affiliate links. Or just keep watching videos. That's better than nothing.
Google Gaga, subscribe to my daddy.